We've reached the halfway point of the 2026 Oklahoma legislative session, and on this week's Link to Local, we'll get an update on the bills that have made it halfway through the process and the ones that have fallen by the wayside. Gage, it's pretty much the end of March, and that means we're about halfway through the Oklahoma legislative session. Where are we at exactly, and what has the most recent action been?
Yeah, like you said, we're right there at the halfway mark. This last week was the deadline week for bills to get across the floor of the chamber that they originated in. So House bills had to get across the House floor and Senate bills had to get across the Senate floor. Those that didn't make it across are no longer eligible to move on in the process. So right there at that halfway point.
So speaking of bills that haven't made it across, I know Farm Bureau has had several bills that we've been at least monitoring or watching that did not make it to the second half of session. What are those bills and what were those topics that we now know are not going to move any further?
Yeah, well, there were several of those bills, as you know, when they file so many, only so many of them can make it. But some of the ones we were interested in, one in particular was House Bill 3178. They had to do with how we tax the personal property tax on farm equipment, tractors, those type of things. It was heard on the House floor, and it failed by 2 votes to pass. And it was one that we were supporting. It would allow farm equipment to depreciate out to zero, and then from that point on, the farmer and rancher would not pay any ad valorem tax on that property, on that equipment for the rest of the time that they owned it. But some of the legislators, including our friendly rural legislators, were concerned about the decrease in the amount of revenue that would cause for the counties, and they weren't getting real clear answers on what that number would be, and they hated to support a bill that they would find out later on that could be very detrimental to the revenue in their county. So that one ultimately did fail and won't be moving on in the process. We had a couple other bills, House Bill 3617, the Right to Repair Act. It was one that was not heard on the House floor. It's a bill that the issue is very important to our members, but we have been working very well with American Farm Bureau Federation and actually have a memorandum of understanding with those companies, trying to make technology available to mechanics that are not part of their company entirely. And also the Trump administration is really trying to continue to work in those negotiations and those discussions to get a right to repair for everybody across the nation. And us at Oklahoma Farm Bureau are pretty satisfied with those discussions that are going on at the federal level and felt like this bill wasn't needed at the state level, and ultimately it did not make it across the House floor, so it is a dead bill. And then another bill, Senate Bill 2157, was the Scenic Rivers, kind of a Scenic Rivers Act, and it would actually designate certain rivers in southeast Oklahoma as scenic rivers. This is one we had a lot of concerns with, just because when you designate those rivers as scenic rivers, with that comes more regulations and restrictions. And when it comes to agriculture that operates in those watersheds and along those rivers, we were just afraid that could definitely put them under some more regulations that would make it more difficult to produce ag products in those watershed areas. So that was a bill that was not heard on the Senate floor, and it was one that we worked on some and were hoping that it wouldn't be heard. And when it was not heard, we were satisfied that that one will not be moving forward this year.
And with those bills and numerous others that have now gone away from the process and are not available to move forward or be heard, that lets us focus in on some of the other bills that are still alive that Farm Bureau has been monitoring. And one of those has gotten actually a decent amount of mainstream media attention and has to do with repurposing of certain oil and gas wells. What is that bill and what does it do?
That bill is House Bill 3173 by Representative Archer, and like you say, it has gotten a lot of attention this year, and it's not even really something we worked on or talked about last year much at all. But this bill allows for the Well Repurposing Act, and what that does is it allows companies that have oil or gas wells that are no longer in use but have not yet been plugged, that are just kind of sitting out there not being used at all. They can repurpose those for storage of geothermal energy or even other types of energy. So this is a bill that we've supported along through the process, but there has been some concerns knowing that the companies that have those oil and gas leases may not be the same company that's going to do the geothermal leases. So we felt like there needed to be a provision put in there that if this repurposing occurs, new contracts need to be made with the landowners before that moves forward. They put that language in before it came across the floor, so we were satisfied with that bill, and it did pass the House floor last week.
I know another bill that we've talked about a couple times actually this year on Lincoln to Local has to do with open pasture roads and making sure our members who might have a county road that goes through a large expanse of their property will still be able to sign on to the open pasture roads. What's the latest with that bill?
So that is one we talked about early on because it was something that came up before session of an issue from a previous legislation that would put a deadline of November 1st of last year to designate any new open pasture roads, and those are just going to be roads that go through a property that the landowner owns the road or the property on both sides of the road, and if they want to take down the fences and allow those cattle to cross in that open pasture, then we want them to be able to still do that. And this allows them to work with county commissioners to designate those roads, and if we get this bill passed, it will take away that deadline so we can continue to have these open pasture roads going forward. And it is one that we've kind of wondering if it was going to get put on the agenda, but late in the week it got put on and it did pass the floor, the Senate floor this week.
In addition to those bills, we have a trio of water bills, and of course water has been a long-time issue for Farm Bureau members. In the last few years, we've seen quite a bit of action and discussion on water. What are these three bills working to accomplish?
Well, we've talked about these three bills quite a bit already, and we've got House Bill 4459 by Representative Newton, and then we have two Senate bills in the Senate, Senate Bill 1928 by Senator Murdoch and Senate Bill 259 by Senator Howard. And Newton's bill passed the House floor last week, and it's one that would require some measuring of some sort and reporting that measuring to receive a 5-year allocation, which means an irrigator can use more than their annual allocation as long as they don't go over the average of the an annual allocation in that 5 years. So it's something that our members are very supportive of. We've been pretty supportive of this bill, and it had, like I say, it passed last week. Well, just this week in the Senate, both of the other bills came up. I wasn't sure if both of them were going to be heard or maybe one of them, but Murdoch's bill, it has the 5-year allocation, but as it stands, the irrigators, those using the groundwater, don't have to do anything much different when it comes to reporting of what they're already doing to receive that 5-year allocation. And then Senator Howard's bill is one that allows for that 5-year allocation as well. It requires some measuring and reporting, but it's one that actually gives some authority to the Oklahoma Water Resources Board to implement some fines and other things if that reporting is not done accurately and in a timely manner. So all three of these bills are still alive. We're confident that all three of them are not going to pass. At some point, the Senate and the House will get together and decide which one of those bills they're going to support. They'll make sure it has language in there that they like, so that bill, the final product could be a combination of some of these bills. But we plan at Oklahoma Farm Bureau plan to be part of those conversations and plan to support one of these bills across the finish line before session is over.
Now, I know when we reach the halfway point and get done with the first set of floor action as those bills pass off of the floor of their chamber of origin, it kind of feels like we hit a reset button and go back to the beginning of the process, even though we're making progress. Where are we at in the session? Kind of what are the next steps for these bills that will be moving on?
Well, it does feel like we're starting over to an extent, so we don't have to pay attention to some of those bills that didn't make it this far in the process, so it does limit what we're watching and what we're working on. But all those bills that went across the House floor are now going to be assigned to Senate committees, and all the bills that went across the Senate floor will be assigned to House committees. So we'll start back next week with committee work. In the House, they'll have their primary committee, and then after a couple weeks, if they don't make that deadline, or hopefully they do make that deadline in most cases, they'll have to go through an oversight committee. Over in the Senate, they just have the one committee to get to, so they'll have an extra week or two to get those bills through Senate committee, and then they'll go back to floor work after that. But it does feel like we're starting the process over, but we're working with a smaller amount of bills and ones we're excited to work for as the process continues.
And I know moving forward that you guys in public policy will be keeping your eyes on what bills are moving that'll concern our Farm Bureau members, and we'll be sure to talk about them in the next update.
We sure will.